Great. So we have Dr. Aditya Khosla here with us today. We are so honored, uh, Aditya, to have you here as the Lavita AI's inaugural Health Innovators Webcast. This is a unique opportunity for the members of the community at Lavita AI and in general, all the audience for this webcast to learn about your amazing career at the intersection of AI and healthcare, and of course, for a lot of interesting topics for the future of um, AI and its impact in healthcare. Of course, there's a lot of innovation that's taking place from a technology perspective, from all sort of things, and healthcare being a largest sector of GDP is always kind of the forefront of being a big adopter of these type of technologies. So with that, maybe we can get started. This is meant to be a very, of course, a casual conversation. I know you and I talked about a few topics that we can cover, but I thought maybe what we can actually start with, Aditya, is for the audience to let them know a little bit more about your background and your work. Of course, you've been a great entrepreneur for anybody that has followed this space. I myself, just as a quick background, got I think first get to know you back in 2015 when I was a very junior person in our investment firm, and I came across your amazing profile as a researcher, PhD computer science at MIT. At that time, you were working with your co-founder to just get started with PathAI, which I'll let you talk about. But so there we go, like about almost 10 years later, and we're here talking about all this amazing work that you have done, and of course, the impact that AI is making and has made in healthcare. So with that, I would love to have you do a overview of your background and also about the companies that have you been involved with, and we can follow that with some questions about these topics.
For sure, for sure. No, thank you, Ali. Thank you for the kind words. And it's been a great 10 years working together, and we're very fortunate to have you as an investor and be part of the journey with us at PathAI. And so that's been phenomenal, and have appreciated your support throughout. And I'm happy to dive into my background and share what we have been up to. So PathAI, I was the founder, like I am the founder, and was formerly the CTO at PathAI, where the main goal was applying AI to pathology. And how we had started was, with the focus of applying it towards biopharma, where the intention was to identify responders versus non-responders using tissue specimen, right? So use AI to find, can we find special biomarkers that allow us to say, hey, this patient is going to respond to this treatment versus not, right? So some of our very first customers were on the biopharma side. And over time, we actually started working in the clinic as well. Now PathAI, like since I left, PathAI has been working very extensively on the clinical side, having some really big deployments, including, Quest Labs, which is adopting the PathAI system across the board. And it's extremely exciting because this is actually the life cycle. It's a very funny thing for PathAI because we had envisioned, I don't think we had envisioned kind of the journey very early on, and we have actually stuck to it for a very long time. Um, not having had much like pivots in some ways, where we had said, okay, we'll work with biopharma, we'll develop these tests to determine, who's the right candidate for a particular treatment. But ultimately, that test needs to come into the clinic, right? Because once this test is developed, you need to be able to deploy it in the clinic when real patients are coming in and saying, hey, I have, XYZ cancer of a certain stage, etc. Am I a good candidate for this drug? And so it's really nice to see over the last few years the company has excelled in, getting the PathAI system deployed in many clinical labs, where now some of these tests are being co-developed with, some of the top pharma companies and will be deployed there. So it's yeah, so that's at a high level what PathAI does. I was, very fortunate to be part of the journey, and and at the time I started, so I'm a tech guy from my background. I got my PhD in computer science. Had never looked at a medical image or done any medical vision before meeting my co-founder Andy. And it was the first time I met him, I was like, Andy, what the hell's a pathologist? Like, why do you guys exist? Because, Andy's a pathologist, like brilliant, brilliant guy. He's an MD, PhD, having covered both, PhD in machine learning and MD with a specialization in pathology. And so he was like, how do you not know what a pathologist is? And, he explained it. It's like, hey, look at tissue under a microscope, and it's the person who tells a patient whether or not they have cancer, right? But usually you don't hear about the pathologist because the pathologist is behind the scenes versus, the
Yeah.
oncologist who is the one that says, okay, now that the pathologist has said you have cancer, let's figure out what are the next steps, right? And so the pathologist's job is extremely critical to determining what happens thereafter. So um, yeah, so that's a little bit about PathAI. Companies done extremely well. We've been really fortunate working with, probably 90% of the top biopharma companies now having a like great deployment, and having raised more than 250 million from some of the top investors, including Ali's firm. And yeah, it's been a fortunate ride. The company continues to go on. I'm no longer there as of the last 3 years. I left to join this company thereafter called Iterative Health, which was focused on AI for gastroenterology. So my focus, like I'd known the CEO founder John there for many many years. Loved what they were doing in the clinical trial space. Felt there was a huge gap, and so dived right in with him as the CTO there. The goal, like what Iterative Health is doing, is essentially helping make clinical trials dramatically faster by operating the sites where these trials happen. So just as context, a clinical trial, a pharma company does it so as to say, is this treatment, I mean, depending on the stage of the trial, it's to evaluate different aspects of the treatment, but ultimately they want to know, is this a good treatment or not? Will it cure the disease that you claim it's going to cure, right? And so they take this drug, they give it to n number of patients, like could be hundreds, could be thousands, depending on the stage of the trial. And this process actually takes a really long time, right? So you got, like, many people have probably heard about companies in the drug discovery phase, which is the very early phase, which a lot of people are trying to speed up. But guess what? Like, even if you have a massive pipeline of treatments that are great, if the clinical trials are not sped up, none of us are going to get to see the benefit of those treatments anytime soon. And that's where iterative health comes in, where we operate the sites that are where the treatment is administered, where you enroll the patients. And there's actually a lot of nuance in how to explain to patients why it's a good idea to actually participate in a trial, and get access to the latest treatments. And to also identify the patients, iterative health uses a lot of technology, based on EHRs, to say, okay, these patients may be good candidates. And then we also operate the sites by working with the physicians and the nurses to say, hey, this is how it might be effective to talk to the patient so as to tell them what are the benefits of being on a trial, right? Like, I'll give you one example. Suppose there's a really great treatment out there in phase 2 that is doing phenomenally well. A phase 3 trial might take, let's just say, 2 3 years to complete. And so if you as a patient say, hey, I don't want to be part of this trial, I'm not a guinea pig, like, why are you poking or prodding me? Guess what? This awesome treatment may not be available to you for the next 3 years. Like, do you want to suffer through those next 3 years, or try this treatment out? If it turns out in 3 months this is not working for you, you can go back to the treatments that are already on market, right? But I don't think most people see a trial in that light, that this is a could be a really great drug that is just not available to you for a long time. And how you actually talk to patients is an art that I think iterative health has figured out, combining that with technology. So that's a little bit about iterative health. And I left iterative about a year ago because I have two little kids and I wanted to spend more time with them, and start thinking about something new. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah.
That's fantastic. No, this is amazing. I think these two companies are just great examples, of course, how technology is infused in modern healthcare. And very interesting because these two actually kind of come from maybe a little bit different angles. PathAI you talked about, obviously that's mostly used by pathologists, and so more from a provider perspective, and then Iterative, which is directly kind of interacting with the patients itself. So really kind of covering on both sides. So actually, kind of across these two companies, maybe one common theme is, um, you know, when I remember actually this when, kind of thinking about investing in PathAI, all those 10 years ago. And always, even at that time, the talk maybe was, okay, with this amazing technology at that time, deep learning was quite new and getting this, kind of adoption in these areas, especially with, kind of high fidelity, large, kind of this pathology whole slide imaging. And at that time, I was okay. So if AI is kind of do a better job eventually than a human in analyzing these images, then what is the role of pathologists? Are we going to be in a world that we don't need pathologists anymore? And then, of course, 10 years later, we know that's not the case. And if anything, actually, a company like PathAI has made pathologists more efficient and more relevant and just more productive. Perhaps same thing with iterative health. And then more importantly, perhaps a lot of the talks nowadays with all these new class and new generation of these AI technologies, that whether they're going to replace fully, those people that are especially, in the kind of the, creative spaces or medicinal or other fields that requires a lot of human expertise. Is that going to eventually replace those humans, or no? It's just going to be a great enabler for those people that are already in those fields. So very interesting kind of observation. Now that you've kind of gone through this whole decade of cycle working with these companies, how do you think the impact of AI will essentially pan out? There will always going to be newer technologies, whether it's AI or other fields that come along. But at the end of the day, what matters is how patients and providers use them and what's going to be their impact in the real world. How do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I view that, I mean, first off, it's great, right? Like we want to do we as a community of, healthcare AI or healthcare technology builders want to make a positive impact on healthcare. And I think it's awesome that there's, so much more adoption that's happening now than ever before. And, like I think some of the most recent successes have been, companies like Abridge, Ambience that are doing, pretty such an important part of the task. But I mean, I remember from my own doctor appointments where, the physician is literally not looking at me and is just like typing notes because like that's what they have to do, in order to like get through their day. And it's not a great experience as a patient, right? But some of these companies are creating an awesome experience for patients where the physician's actually listening to them
Yeah.
rather than trying to take notes constantly. And I don't know if this thing is there yet, but you can imagine in the future, like if a physician has some thoughts or questions, like they can actually just ask very quickly into these systems. Whereas, I've had times where they're like, oh, let me look up this chart and, go deep into XYZ things and takes a few minutes. And I have a precious few minutes with my physician. And so I think all of these things are awesome that they're happening. I think on the flip side, um, I've definitely had, my own set of like frustrations with healthcare as well. One of which I think, one of which I'll share, which is how I think, and I'm not alone in this. I'm not the first to find this out, but it's definitely a problem that we've come up against at PathAI in particular, is just how payments work, right? And how
Mm.
uh, payers are like it in some ways. It's like I think a lot of the community of entrepreneurs are motivated because we're like we want to do best for patients, but in
Mhm.
some ways it feels like we are not, like we are fighting the system in order to do good for patients, rather than the system inherently supporting what's best for patients. And let me give you an example of that. Like for example, in pathology, right? Like typically, like the way you're paid is like, okay, you read a slide, I'll give you $100, right? Now, if you read a slide with AI, I'll still give you $100. So who's going to pay for the AI, right? Like how is, like, because obviously, there are companies building all these systems and they need to get paid in order to support their staff to keep building the next better generation of systems. And if you're always just paid like, in this fee for service model, which is, majority of the US to this date, um, you essentially are like, okay, now if I'm still going to get paid the same thing, I have to spend my own money out of the goodness of my heart uh, to, bring in the AI system that I know is actually going to help patients provide better diagnoses, etc. But why would I do that? Because it's hurting my bottom line, right? And that's not a great um, system to work under. And I hope, and I do think like value-based care, etc., is addressing that. But it would be awesome if, it felt more like the systems were working with you rather than against you, to pay you as little as possible, despite having, like actually really good benefits for patients.
I was on mute. That's actually a great point. Kind of a segue maybe to the next topic we can discuss. So this is a slide actually we discussed a little bit before. It's like from a recent article by Menlo Ventures. They were kind of looking at what is the landscape of AI in healthcare, and some of the companies you mentioned, Bridge and Ambience. Interesting. Lot of these kind of so-called unicorns, of course, these are all great companies making impact. You brought up, the point about payment. So a lot of these companies kind of dealing from essentially bringing those efficiencies that are needed on the provider side, or whether it's on the payer side. And there's a lot of innovation that can happen there. But then one of the frustration that we've seen with people that kind of compelled us to actually work with Lavita idea and start Lavita and now the Lavita community is actually patients at the end of the day are probably very eager to get access to the innovation, be able to use AI for,
Yeah.
whether there's the wellness, whether it's, a specific condition they have, to be able to analyze their data, which is now ever increasing with, of course, electronic health records, but then all the tracking data from your, health trackers and all of the things that you, follow with your, kind of care teams, everything, and all the data that you can have. And it's amazing that actually that space has remained relatively unexplored, given that AI is such a data hungry space. So this brought up to such an interesting place that, across the companies that you work with and all the companies and ideas that you've, kind of been exposed to, where do you think that actually, when it comes to applications of AI for personal healthcare, and the meaning that what is the kind of, at the end of the day, the impact that, you see that patients will have? We can argue, for example, whether it's going to be AI that used for the discovery of some new medicine, and that would be fantastic, right? But like you said, in terms of bringing a new drug to the market, that could take, years, if it's not decades. So it's a very long term. But kind of in a maybe a little shorter term, where is that actually this new generation of AI technologies, whether it's Gen AI, whether it's some other related fields, that you think is going to actually bring tangible impact for patients, especially in this day and age that everybody's have access to all these data for their healthcare and then want to be able to use them more efficiently?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think this is like, I mean, I hope something like this happens, and I feel like Lavida is actually a great, step in that direction. Is I think if you look at how, and this is not related to any of these startups, just to be clear. And just to maybe highlight the previous point I made, how many of these are actually medical device companies, right? Like that are working
Yeah.
closer to the patient? And I think the answer is none of them. And that's the part of the system I was talking about that's broken. But I think another part that is, I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't call it broken, but it's just a natural evolution that has happened in the system. And where I do think patients need to sort of, I've met so many patients that have had to take control of their own health, is the case that as knowledge in the world has grown across all these different, like across the human body, right? Like we've been forced as humans, given our limited capacity in our heads, to specialize to certain like areas, right? Like people are not like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm a GI doc, I'm an oncologist, I'm a pathologist. Like there's just like people have started to, and this is many years over time, people have become really specialized. But you as a person are just one person, right? Like everything that's happening to you is could be interconnected in many ways. And like there have been evidence of like your microbiome maybe affecting like your mood or like your energy, etc., etc. And but as these specialists look at just one part of you, like for example, like my son had very severe eczema when he was young, and so you go to the pediatric dermatologist, and they're just looking at that, but it could be related to his gut, it could be related to what we're feeding him, but they're like, oh, that's not really our
Mhm.
domain. Maybe the really good ones are like, okay, we'll, stretch and say something there. But it's like, oh, you should go see this other specialist. Uh, who is the person piecing all these puzzle pieces together to say that, hey, you are one person. Here's all the things happening to you, across the board. Let's help you figure that out, right? And usually that would be, I think the intention in the healthcare system is that it would have been the PCP that does that for you. But
Yeah.
for better or worse, I think the PCP, I mean, at least I don't want to say anything bad about my PCP, but the PCPs I've interacted with in the past are, not the detective kind, right? Like they're not like, ooh, let
Yeah.
me look here, let me look there. You almost want someone like a house MD, right? Like who's putting all these
Yeah.
puzzle pieces together. And I think in the future, that's likely to be Gen AI at this point, right? Because
Mhm.
which human is trained on all specialties? None of them. But guess
Mhm.
what? Like your LLM surely is. It's trained on all available, like sort of human knowledge. By no means is it perfect, but at least it might have a greater ability than many humans to connect some of the dots and say, hey, here's a few hypotheses on, what could be happening. And whether this is, patient driven or not, I do think initially it likely has to be because, like when you go see a specialist, they live in a different health system. You see specialist number one versus two, they might be in different health systems. So the data is also not connected unless you as the patient go and connect it together and, something
Yeah.
like Lavita or other apps that might be out there. And then apply a Gen AI engine on it to say, okay, here's things that, connect symptom one, two, three together to say you might have, I don't know, like a particular Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or whatever, the issue might be. But when looking in isolation, I think you just don't figure these things out. And I've met so many patients who've just had to, like, like they have done a lot. Like I think there's been actually few published stories of Gen AI success on this, but also I know
Mhm.
personally patients, they're like, the doctor couldn't figure it out. I had to connect all these dots and tell them, go look here. And then, doctor's like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, why is it like, is that what we want our healthcare system to be? I don't think so. Right. And I think this is going to be a big change that happens in the future, like that we need all this, we need everything about you connected, and then um, either a human or AI assisted, like a human assisted with AI will figure out what's
Yeah.
actually wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a great viewpoint, Aditya. I think that's probably the highlight of this conversation. I think what you brought is kind of that glue that kind of connects all the dots for a person, right? And it's amazing because it exists in other areas, right? You have when you think about, hey, like what is my, I don't know, online shopping persona? There are companies that are exactly built around just knowing that, and for good or bad, they help you to have a very good experience or personalized experience. Maybe, kind of course, there are data privacy concerns, but then to some extent, it helps you to have a very personalized and optimal experience when you're shopping online. But then when it
That's
comes to healthcare, there's so many disparate because of course, like you said, there could be barriers because of the whole, fee for service type of model. So then everybody's kind of looking at a very isolated and siloed type of area where they just want to, maximize their own financial benefit to some extent. And then there's no kind of a single kind of or God's eye view when it comes to, okay, how we can make sure that the whole health and well-being of a one person is managed holistically with all the information that's available to them, and then also enable that individual to be able to access all of that. So that's amazing. I'm sure that resonates a lot with Lavita community, and thank you for putting in such a vivid message for us. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What do you think, Aditya? Maybe one final question I would love to ask you that I was actually directly from our community members is, so what do you generally think are kind of barriers for adoption when it comes to innovation in healthcare, whether it's AI or other things? I think people generally think of, there was another graph from this article by Menlovich. People generally think healthcare is maybe, well, of course, when you think of hospitals or providers in general, it's a kind of a slow to adoption. Obviously, you're dealing with a very high risk environment. So you cannot just, go and try every single new piece of technology in an operating room or so of course, FDA exists for a reason. So all the kind of the checks and points and to make sure that anything that's going to have an impact on humans' health. But at the same time, there could be a lot of these innovations that whether it's directly dealing with patients or otherwise, on the kind of the back office technology related to providers and payers, all of that. What do you think overall remains still the main barriers for technology adoption? Are there things that we can actually try to voice when individuals and patients actually try to voice that, so then as to help to improve the innovation when it comes to healthcare?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, barriers to adoption, I personally think a lot of it is on this, you know, how to put it? Like, I think one is obviously like this payer sort of model, right? Like a fee for service model, I think definitely creates natural barriers to adoption for technology. The way payers start to reimburse technology also is a big barrier to adoption because they're like, oh, give me evidence, and not give me evidence that this actually will help my patients. Give me evidence that I will spend less money as a consequence
Mm.
of reimbursing you, right? Like, and this was an interesting anecdote. I was talking to another like healthcare founder yesterday, and he's like, I built tests that can do really good prediction of I think breast cancer, I believe prostate cancer, and one more I'm forgetting. Occurrence for a patient, let's say 5 years or 10 years from now, and be pretty accurate based on historical data. But when I go talk to, so from a patient point of view, it's like great. Like if I know that there's a high chance that I might get a particular cancer, I will go get more screening because the sooner you find cancer, the more likely you are to eradicate it, right? But when you go talk to payers, payers are like, hey, like like I'm not looking that far out for patients right now because people keep changing health plans. How's that? Like, because like obviously when you change jobs, you're likely to change health plans, and so they will naturally create more barriers to try to reimburse this, which means that this person would have to fight to like either like prove it out all the way 5 or 10 years from now is, and I don't know if that's how long we want to wait for a test like this to be actually available to us. um, Although it's a good thing, like I mean, it has its pros and cons, right? Because you don't want to smell snake oil, but at the same time, if something shows promise of working, we're not able to get that out to patients because
Mm.
people are like, oh, but how is this going to affect my bottom line? And my bottom line is not going to be positively impacted. So I don't care if it's good for patients. I'm just not going to pay for this, right? And that's, I
Yeah.
think, tends to be a huge barrier. And actually, part of the reason some of these other startups like I'll give Abridge or Ambience as an example because I'm more familiar, um, have been really successful is because they're actually able to help increase the revenue of the
Mm.
hospital, right? Like by not or like or whatever like provider, because they don't miss parts of the conversation that have happened. They make sure that if I said, oh, you should get this test, it gets written in, it gets
Mm.
coded and fully put into the EHR so that the patient can go ahead and get it. It saves people time, but I think at the same time increases revenue. And this is a good thing, right? Like I'm not like I think they've brilliantly navigated the constraints in the healthcare market, which is great. But why do these constraints existing make it very hard for what's good for patients to be uh, available essentially. And
Okay.
yeah, I think that's one. I feel like people usually put it on the FDA. At least my perspective on this is I think it's less the FDA, and I could be
Mhm.
wrong, but I've worked with FDA over the last 10 years. I think they're actually really uh, like they're decent to deal with. There's obviously challenges, don't get me wrong. But there are many tools that make the FDA process much more uh, palatable now and don't slow you down in your development. And FDA is doing a good job, right? Like they need to make sure that we're not like companies building stuff are not harming patients. But I think despite having gone through the FDA, you still don't see adoption, primarily because of how the payment system is um, not conducive to what's best for patients. And that's why, to me, that feels ultimately like the biggest barrier. Um, yeah.
Very well said. Very well said. I completely agree. I think, at the end of the day, healthcare is a business for a lot of people. It's one of the largest, I think the largest portion of the healthcare. Healthcare is the largest portion of the GDP in the US. So obviously, when you have a huge business around something, there will be safeguards for people that are in that business to protect it, to just, you look at business KPIs for improving it. Like you said, hopefully the brilliance of startups that are emerging and have been around, and you've been pioneers of some of them, are the ones that are able to intelligently navigate kind of the business requirements and financial kind of literacy of the healthcare system while providing and bringing these innovations to the patients. That, of course, would be the golden kind of combination. It's an amazing conversation, Aditya. I wish we have more time to continue with you. Such a rare opportunity for me, for Lavita community to, of course, have this direct conversation with a great entrepreneur, especially at this unique field of AI and healthcare. So I wish you all the best, and thank you so much for taking the time today with us. Um, we hope that you engage with the Lavita community and kind of advocate for Lavita. We were here to really bring empowerment to the individuals and make sure that they have all the data that they can in terms of their wellness and well-being and healthcare, and bring that, of course, all of that with the full protection that they can have from privacy computing, data privacy that's completely kind of encoded in the technology that we're building, and then use all of that to their benefit to improve their health and wellness. So with that, thank you so much, Aditya, and we hope to see you again on this webcast. And by the way, this was the inaugural webcast, so this was again something exciting and unique for us, and we'll have more of this, of course, in the future. You set the bar pretty high for any future participants, so we have to, of course, make sure of that. So thank you so much, Aditya. Very
Thank
much
you, Ali. Really, really appreciate
appreciate
it.
your input.
Yeah, thank
Right,
you.
thank you.